With summer now dying out and autumn upon us, that can only mean one thing. My favourite holiday of the year is fast approaching, that being Halloween. Oh yes, you really can't beat it, can you? The perfect time of year to kick back and enjoy some classic horror films. A perfect excuse to have some quiet nights in when not working and to recover from a great summer drinking in beer gardens while soaking up the sun. To celebrate my favourite holiday of the year, I thought I'd cover the Castlevania games that fall under the 8-bit category. So for all 4 Fridays of this month I'll drop a video, starting with today. Next Friday will be Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, the following Friday will be Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, then the Game Boy games which there are 3 of. I've never uploaded in quick succession like this before, so it'll be some task. If this sounds like something you'd like, then I'm happy to have you along for the ride. If you'd rather watch it all in a oneer, then not to worry, I'll be uploading the whole series in one massive video on Halloween Day. But enough of all that, let's start off with this classic, simply named Castlevania. I hope you enjoy. I should probably start by saying my first introduction to the Castlevania series was the 4th entry in the series, that came out in 1991 for the Super Nintendo, named Super Castlevania 4, and I absolutely loved it. You see, I was born in 1993, so of course I didn't get to enjoy it on release, but some of my earliest gaming related memories was watching my parents play this along with the other games they had bought throughout the years for the system. It wouldn't be until years later when, to be honest, I was getting pretty bored of the modern games that were coming out at the time and decided to hook up the Super Nintendo to see if I could finally beat some games I never did when I was younger. The first game to be placed in the Super Nintendo was Super Castlevania 4. I suddenly felt an overwhelming sensation that I would later find out was called nostalgia, and I was absolutely hooked. The gameplay, the graphics, the enemies, the sub-weapons, and holy moly, the music. I was instantly hooked. Then it got me thinking, if this is the 4th game in the series, then what are the previous 3 like? I didn't know about the Game Boy versions at this point. I just knew there was 3 previous titles I needed to track down, and I finally did. So let's talk about the first in the series, Castlevania. The game was directed by a man named Hitoshi Akamatsu, I think that's how you say it anyway, who to this day is surrounded in mystery. For someone who made this series, he kind of just disappeared after the release of the 3rd game, Dracula's Curse, and I assume he liked his privacy, because there isn't much information about him on the internet. What I could find though is he was a massive fan of old school horror films and cinema in general, and wanted to make a game that put the player into a film-like game, which when we get into the game, you'll notice it. The game was originally released in 1986 for the Family Computer Disk System, being published and developed by Konami. There was many ports of this game released over the years, and for the most part they are all the same apart from the MSX version that went under the name of Vampire Killer. But there are many added features and the gameplay is a bit different, which I'll touch on later. But in this video we'll cover probably the most well known and played version, that being the version on the Nintendo Entertainment System released in 1987. As far as the story goes, well, they didn't do it justice from reading the back of the box, that's for sure. Remember, this was way before the internet, and plus it's the first game in the series. I don't think they had expectations of it becoming a well-loved series. Knowing what we all know now about Castlevania, you can imagine my face when I finally found this game boxed at an old retro store. Yeah, the front cover looked on point, and just what I was expecting, but when I flipped it over and read the following, it just left me puzzled. If you think it's scary on the outside, wait till you see the basement. You're in for the longest night of your life. Ghosts, goblins, demons, wolves, bats, creatures lurking around every corner. As you descend deeper and deeper, they get thicker and thicker. Okay. Better stick close to the cavern floor, it's your only chance of finding a weapon or two. You're gonna need them. Because when you finally meet the Count, you know he'll be going for the jugular. So keep your courage up and your stakes sharp, and say your prayers. I mean, what the hell is that? It doesn't do it justice for what's truly lurking in and around said castle. I mean, I had only played the 4th game by this point, and I knew that what I was reading was a load of bollocks. My only theory for this is maybe they decided to tone it down so when kids handed it to their parents to buy and they looked on the backside to read it, it didn't come across too scary for them. I don't know, but I'll tell you what the back of the box should have said. After Dracula was destroyed by the legendary Christopher Belmont, Transylvania had been enjoying peace for the last 100 years. The locals were enjoying their Easter celebration when out of nowhere a bolt of lightning struck. During the panic, Dracula's castle rose from the ground where it was once demolished, signalling the return of the Count himself. Simon Belmont, a member of the Belmont clan, knew it was only him who could save Transylvania by using the same whip, the vampire killer, which brought an end to Dracula's terrifying reign a century earlier. I mean, how badass does that sound? But enough talking about the plot, let's get into the game. The game starts with Simon Belmont walking up to the gates of Dracula's castle and the game begins. The aim is to get from point A to point B. It's very linear. The game is cut up into 18 stages. You'll know when you have reached a new stage. This occurs by entering a door, or when you beat a boss you'll see Simon walking with a map in the background indicating where you're going next. Or you could just look at the stage counter in the top right hand side of the screen. With the NES only having an A and B button, it's fairly straightforward controlling Simon. You control his movement with the D-pad, the A button is used for jumping, and by pressing B you can use his whip, the vampire killer. There are many sub-weapons that can be picked up along the way, and to use these you must press up on the D-pad while pressing B. Sounds annoying, but it actually works pretty well if I'm honest. Among these stages you'll encounter many different enemy types that suit the setting of the game very well. You'll come across zombies, bats, fishmen, skeletons, along with many more. They all have their own unique characteristics. I don't feel like any two enemies are the same. You've got some that will just come towards you that are easy to take out, while others may throw projectiles or come towards you in a pattern like Medusa heads that are fairly easy to defend, but when more than one appear it can become pretty chaotic. This one section in stage 15 really got on my nerves. You have to face axe throwing men who take a ton of hits and can block your sub weapons while Medusa heads are flying all around you. Each enemy you defeat you will be granted with points, which is something I've never got. Like, I understand around this time there was a big boom surrounding arcade machines, which was all top score heavy, but who was bragging back then about getting X amount of points on a home console in a game like this? With the amount of enemies thrown at you, the game does well by including a large number of sub-weapons to collect. You can only hold one sub-weapon at a time, so it can be trial and error to see which one suits you best for each level. The good thing about the sub-weapons in this is that they all have their own uniqueness to them, like the knife. Oh wait, the dagger? Or how about the holy cross? Wait, the boomerang? Let's talk about the holy water then. Firebomb? What's with all these names for sub-weapons? It's almost like a sort of Mandela effect. We've been naming these wrong our whole lives when it's always been there in black and white right in front of our eyes. Anyway, from here I'll be calling them by the names I know them as. The knife is thrown straight ahead. The axe is thrown in an arch, which is good for hitting enemies that may be above you. Holy water will stop enemies in their tracks and completely decimate them. But my two personal favourite sub-weapons have to go to the holy cross and the stopwatch. The holy cross will hit an enemy as it flies past them, and also hit them on the way back to you, dealing 2 amounts of damage. The stopwatch does just that, stops time completely, which can be good for stopping tougher enemies to lay into them with the whip, or even stop obstacles in your path, making it easier to get past. Some of these sub-weapons can make enemy bosses a walk in the park though, like check me out against the Queen Medusa. Just stop the time and smack her up with a whip. Complete joke. You can also get upgrades for your sub-weapons by collecting these books with numbers on them. The highest they go up to is 3. By collecting these you have the ability to throw multiple sub-weapons at once, dealing even more damage. These can be found in places within the levels, or if you successfully kill enemies 10 times with said sub-weapons, you'll be granted with these upgrades. You may have seen from the footage me picking up hearts along my way. I wouldn't laugh at you if you thought they were for regenerating your health, because they aren't. They are actually used for your sub-weapons. Depending on the sub-weapon, they take up certain amount of hearts. For example, the knife takes up 1, while something like the stopwatch takes up 5. You may be wondering how exactly you regain health, and that is by whipping walls to find hidden bits of meat. No joke. These can also be found in stones that blend in within the scenery, so if you're about to die, it may be worthwhile just whipping at everything to see what's hidden. There are also upgrades for the whip. You start with a weaker whip, but by picking up these upgrades they make it made of steel, then the second upgrade makes it longer for better range against the enemies. There's also an invincibility upgrade you can get, but this only lasts for a brief period of time. And also a cross which obliterates everything on screen, but I always seem to find them when there was no enemies around, making it pretty pointless most of the time. The earlier Castlevania games get heavily criticised for their difficulty, and it's not so much that I find them hard, They can be a little frustrating at times though. This can all be pointed towards the dreaded knockback when Simon gets hit. He will fall backwards and become invincible for a brief period. That's all fine and well, but if you're on a ledge and get knocked back, that's an instant death. Also, while on stairs, you're completely vulnerable to attacks. You can whip while on the stairs, but given how slow Simon controls, it's usually hard to get yourself in an optimal position to attack unless the enemy is directly in your line of attack. Not so bad at the start of the game, but this can become challenging towards the end. Stage 17, I'm talking to you. But really, who wants to play a game that's incredibly easy? What's to gain from that? If Castlevania did not have these issues, it would be a walk in the park. From other videos I've seen on this game, I really think they are playing up for the camera. Yeah, it's for entertainment purposes, I get that, but I've met loads of people who refuse to play these earlier Castlevania games because they assume the whole game is just one big death trap, when it's not. The game gives you ample amounts of upgrades to be able to give yourself a decent challenge. Also, when you die, it's not like you get sent back to the beginning of the game, you just get placed in the stage after the last boss you defeated, so it's pretty fair with you if we're honest here. Now I know this sounds like I'm giving it the big un, thinking I'm the bollocks at this game. I'm definitely not. My first ever playthrough did give me a good challenge, but this is now my third or so playthrough, so with experience of course you're going to find it a little less forgiving. One thing I found the most challenging were actually the bosses. There are 6 in total and none of them are the same. Taking further inspiration from classic horror films, we see the likes of a vampire bat, Queen Medusa, Frankenstein and Igor, Death, Mummy Man and Dracula himself. They all come with their own challenges. The Mummy, Queen Medusa and the Vampire Bat are fairly easy enough, but my god, Death, Frankenstein with Igor and Dracula are brutal. Death throws his scythes around, so you must either hit them or avoid them while also getting some hits on Death himself. Frankenstein is easy enough, but it's his snide pal Igor that'll give you the most bother by jumping all over the place. But the most annoying of all, and to be honest, every time I get to him it takes me ages to remember his pattern, and that is Dracula. The idea is straightforward enough. Land hits on the head, but he throws fire projectiles whenever he is vulnerable for attacks. Once you get the pattern down, you'll feel like an absolute idiot for not doing so earlier. Dracula has 2 forms. Once the initial form has been defeated, he turns into some big mad beast. Thankfully though, this form is easier than the previous one. Once defeated, you get to watch the castle crumble once again and the credits start to roll. It's pretty well known now that all the credits are puns on famous actors from the classic horror film world. A nice nod to the folk who inspired this game to begin with. The whole setting in which this game takes place is absolutely fantastic. No 2 levels ever feel the same. I can imagine if I played this as a kid, I'd have felt as scared as I did seeing Castlevania 4 for the first time. For me personally, the whole castle feels believable. Like, even though I was an adult when I first played this, I'll never forget seeing the top of the castle out in the distance while playing. Gave me that gut feeling that it was about to get real. Every environment you're in just feels alive, not only due to enemies lurking everywhere, but while in the clock tower you see the gears turning, which apparently represented Dracula's heart. As long as they keep turning, Dracula is still alive, which when watching the castle fall, it's only the clock tower you see falling while the rest still remains, subtly hinting at a sequel. Hitoshi's idea was to create a horror game inspired by his favourite films. He wanted you to feel like you were playing in a film, and it comes across that way. The credit screen looks like an old school credit scroll, and also look at the main menu. The pattern at the top and bottom look exactly like old film reels. We can't talk about a Castlevania game though without mentioning the music, and trust me, it's fantastic. Really helps keeping the pace of the game up and can be pretty spooky at times. It's definitely not my favourite Castlevania soundtrack of all time, but it does the job well. Some songs in this would later be remixed or reimagined for future titles. It's just refreshing to hear that they handled the music brilliantly from the start for this franchise. I did briefly touch on the other version of this game that was being worked on at the same time called Vampire Killer, which for the most part looks and plays the same, but there was a bit more exploration involved with the player having to get keys which are well hidden to progress through the stages. Personally, I haven't played that version, as I feel the NES version is the total package, but this maybe have been part of the experimentation that would lead to the follow-up game, Simon's Quest, which will be my next video, so stay tuned for that. That brings me to the end of this video. Please, if you haven't before, then definitely give this game a bash. It's now known as a classic, and for good reasons too. Whenever I think of Nintendo, I of course think of Mario and Zelda, but coming in at a solid 3rd place for me has to be Castlevania. It's a great challenge, and if you beat it, it honestly feels amazing seeing those credits roll as you think about what you just went through to get there. This is just the first in a 4-part series I'm doing on the 8-bit era of Castlevania games, so if you haven't already, hit subscribe to be notified of future releases here on the channel. Also, if you liked the video, then give it a like. If you didn't, then give it a dislike. Either way, it lets me know what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya!